It's a pipeline. Okay, so we start teaching this in grade one. There's no such thing as biological sex. We're going to liberate you from oppressive sex categories, and then you can decide as a kid. You're 6, 7 years old. I mean, you still believe in Batman and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and maybe Santa Claus and the scary monster under your bed or in the closet. But you believe also that you could become a girl if you're a boy, or a boy if you're a girl. And kids have no concept of being able to consent to these kinds of interventions. But schools are affirming this in children. So a confused kid, after being told they could be a girl when they're a boy or vice versa, starts saying, well, maybe I am the opposite gender. And then the schools go ahead and they change the pronouns. They do something called social transition. So they facilitate and they support the child changing their name, changing their gender pronouns, and in many cases, okay, and on a routine basis, schools are keeping this a secret from parents. I've got at least a half a dozen Ottawa teachers independently have told me that their schools keep complex Google Docs with cross-sex status, the new name that they're calling the child at school, and new pronouns, and which parents they're telling lies to. There is no long-term scientific affirmation or confirmation that these do any good whatsoever. The claim is that if we don't do these kinds of interventions, kids are going to they're going to kill themselves, and that's what teachers and doctors and gender therapists and ideologues are telling parents. Would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? Is the emotional blackmail that they use. But there's no long-term studies. There's no studies on the off-label use of puberty blockers to gender transition children. That's not what those drugs are designed for. They're used off-label on an experimental basis. So we're doing medical experiments on vulnerable children in Canada that is sterilizing them and rendering them incapable of sexual gratification in their lifetime. I just came down from Hogsback. Beautiful little couple of stage rapids, um, bigger drops than I've ever done. Not too big, a foot and a half or so, uh, and a fair amount of fun. I'm just now at the foot near Carleton University. Where are we? There we go, Carleton U in the background, hanging on the Rideau River, little Tuesday afternoon. I've been asking the question, why should you pay attention to what's going on with school board trustee elections and the upcoming fall 2022 municipal elections? Well, it's because of what's going on in schools. And schools and the administration of schools, the teachers' unions, the school boards, and activist teachers over the last 10 years or so have taken steps that I believe really, really undermine the trust that parents should have in the public school system. There's an abuse of trust going on, and there are abuses of power that are happening in the school system. And we should all be very concerned about this. We're teaching gender ideology in school. Now, what is gender ideology? Gender ideology comes from a belief in something called social constructionism. Social constructionism is basically that we make things up with language. The social construction of language comes from patriarchy, which is the abusive power system that this belief theory says that we exist under, and that language creates oppressive categories for women and oppressed minorities. And the very language of masculine and feminine, the conspiracy theory is that the patriarchy, men, made this up in order to oppress people and hold them in rigid and oppressive category structures. Now, in the 90s, I fell into some conspiracy theory sort of reading. I was very curious about things like, I don't know, alien abductions and Freemasons and the Illuminati and historic conspiracies. And this notion of patriarchy really falls into that kind of category of conspiracy. It's a way of assigning agency to phenomena as if somebody actively um, and consciously created these language systems with the agenda to oppress people, right? Like to control. And so the idea is to deconstruct language to liberate people from oppression. This isn't an exaggeration. This is a belief system. Uh, we can sort of assume at this point that 10% or so of the population is actually believing in this. We started seeing it in the universities about uh, 8 years ago, 2014 or so, in in a philosophy called that people call safetyism. And safetyism is this notion that people's feelings have primacy, and that oppressive categories can do harm by making people have feelings. All this is very um, abstract and strange, and one would think, like, how the heck could this get into our school systems? Well, what's happened is that activists in the academic institutions, in universities, have infiltrated teachers' colleges, and they're teaching teachers to teach children about this ideology. And so now we have these people who've graduated from university in the last 10 years, and they've formed consulting companies and started creating curriculum and books for school content to liberate kids from these oppressive categories of boy and girl. That's why in Ottawa, in grade 1, children are learning about the social construction of gender, that there's no such thing as boys and girls, that we make this up. It's social conditioning solely. There's no biology involved whatsoever, and that it's actually a conspiracy to take people's freedom away. And this creates a ressentiment, a resentment in people who buy into this ideology. And what's happening is overwhelmingly girls in the last 10 years, specifically girls with mood disorders, with a history of cutting, with features of personality disorders, obsessive behavior, autism, various other comorbid mental health conditions, have begun ruminating. This captures their imagination, and they begin ruminating about this. And there's a phenomena known as rapid onset gender dysphoria. Now, that's a descriptive term of this phenomena where girls are suddenly in their teens with no history before of presenting with any masculine ideation, no desire to wear boys' clothes or play with boys' toys or do anything on that would stereotypically be considered male, suddenly ideating and coming up with statements that they are trans, that they're actually boys, or that they're non-binary, or that they're rejecting their bodies as girls. And the numbers are quite startling. From 2007 to 2017, at the Tavistock GIDS Clinic, the Gender Identity Disorder Services Clinic, the numbers went up by 44 times, from 79 presentations in 2007 to 2,400 presentations in 2017. A 15-year timeline on the American College Survey. That's a survey that gets done at U.S. colleges every year, every September. The number of gender nonconforming girls over the 15-year period of 2006 to 2021 was up by 100 times. That's the 10,000% increase in the presentation of this phenomenon. So why should anyone care? Should we include trans-identified kids? Shouldn't we accept gender nonconformity? Well, absolutely. Gender nonconformity, I mean, a girl, we've always known, at least in my lifetime, a girl who kind of behaves like a boy, is into the boys' sports and sort of competition, and maybe they're lesbian, maybe they're not. They're just sort of oriented towards objects and doing things, and aren't presenting in the stereotypical female way. Well, that's completely normal and completely acceptable. Same thing with boys. There are boys who tend to be more towards the effeminate side and act in more stereotypically female ways, and that's entirely okay. But the problem is we have the gender industry, and we have laws, and we have this. We made this leap that for kids who are gender nonconforming, we have to give them medication at younger and younger ages to perform gender confirmation medicalization. So that means puberty blockers at younger ages. Tanner stage 2 of puberty. It's an early stage of puberty for boys and girls. Some girls are hitting Tanner 2. at 8 or 9 years old. And if they have identified as gender questioning, and their parents are taking them to a gender clinic, they can be put on these puberty blockers. Now, what do puberty blockers do? Well, they stop puberty. What are they? Well, they're derived from toxic cancer drugs used to treat breast cancer and prostate cancer, and they halt the forward development of the endocrine system. They have all kinds of side effects, serious emotional side effects, rages, but they also stop bone development and skeletal development. And not only that, we're finding in studies now that they actually undermine bone density and reduce bone density. So there are cases now reported where kids are detransitioning, where they realize they've made a mistake, and they're detransitioning, and they have osteoporosis. There are cases happening like this in teenagers. Okay, so serious bone diseases in teenagers, and then if kids go on after that, and almost universally, according to courts findings in the United Kingdom back in late 2020, early 2021, I believe, the Kira Bell case, that puberty blockers almost universally, 98.7% of the time, lead to the administration of cross-sex hormones. And when that happens, cross-sex hormones on top of puberty blockers, what you've done is you've stopped the natural development of secondary sex characteristics. So, penile growth and testicle development in boys, the deepening of the voice and the throat, hips and breasts in girls. All these things are halted, and they're halted in such a way that the children are sterilized. They'll never be able to have kids, obviously, but very often they are unable to have any kind of sexual satisfaction in their lives ever. Now, under the banner of inclusion and diversity and equity, and the magical rainbow flag, we are saying that we need to do these serious experimental medical interventions on children, and that we believe they can somehow consent, and they can know for sure when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, or even 13 or 14 or 15 years old, that they're the opposite gender. And all the safeguards have been taken down. These drugs are administered now in some places by a general physician, the general practitioner, who has been given almost no training, except biased affirmative care guidelines that don't even share the doctors what the kinds of risks of these interventions are. Now, it's a pipeline. Okay, so we start teaching this in grade 1. There's no such thing as biological sex. We're going to liberate you from oppressive sex categories, and then you can decide as a kid. You're 6, 7 years old. I mean, you still believe in Batman and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and maybe Santa Claus, and the scary monster under your bed or in the closet. But you believe also that you could become a girl if you're a boy, or a boy if you're a girl. And kids have no concept of being able to consent to these kinds of interventions. But schools are affirming this in children. So a confused kid, after being told they could be a girl when they're a boy, or vice versa, starts saying, well, maybe I am the opposite gender. And then the schools go ahead and they change the pronouns. They do something called social transition. So they facilitate and they support the child changing their name, changing their gender pronouns, and in many cases, okay, and on a routine basis, schools are keeping this a secret from parents. I've got at least a half a dozen Ottawa teachers independently have told me that their schools keep complex Google Docs with cross-sex status, the new name that they're calling the child at school, and new pronouns, and which parents they're telling lies to. So in some cases, one parent knows in the case of a split family, and the other parent doesn't, and they're keeping secrets from parents. Now, this is extraordinarily dangerous because a child gets to be 13, 14, 15. The school has taught them that they're allowed to keep secrets from parents, and suddenly they're at an age where they're going without parental involvement to gender clinics, and they're being affirmed by activist teachers, and they're being sterilized in the gender clinics at hospitals. We do it here at CHEO. There's 250 teenage, mostly girls, going through the CHEO gender therapy clinic every year to It's puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and even sex reassignment surgeries um, that are being done. There are girls in Canada, 13, 14, 15 years old, who are having double mastectomies as gender confirmation surgeries. Our schools are complicit in this. These these are crimes against humanity. There is no long-term scientific affirmation or confirmation that these do any good whatsoever. The claim is that if we don't do these kinds of interventions, kids are going to they're going to kill themselves, and that's what teachers and doctors and gender therapists and ideologues are telling parents. Would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? Is the emotional blackmail that they use. But there's no long-term studies. There's no studies on the off-label use of puberty blockers to gender transition children. That's not what those drugs are designed for. They're used off-label on an experimental basis. So we're doing medical experiments on vulnerable children in Canada that is sterilizing them and rendering them incapable of sexual gratification in their lifetime. And our school trustees, our boards of trustees, our teachers, our administrators, and our teachers' unions are all complicit in this, not to mention the medical industry. So that's why I'm running for school board trustee. Our schools are corrupt and pathological. And I say pathological in the most serious of terms, because a society that is conducting gender, medical, and fertility experiments on vulnerable girls is a pathological society, and these are pathological institutions, and we need to rein in what's happening to protect our kids from this kind of unbelievable abuse. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm running for school trustee, OCDSB, Zone 6 in Ottawa.